Excellent analysis. Because we do want to have a vibrant economy. As the saying goes, it lifts all boats. And I really appreciate the analysis on where the Medicare spending is going. That is something we need to deal with. And I hear solutions of throwing money at the problem, but the real problem is we don't have the proper money to throw at it because the economy is not doing as it should. So, and then I still hear our friends talk about the need to stop climate change. Unfortunately, the climate has been changing since the Earth ever appeared, and I've got a lot of friends out there, and I say friends facetiously, people on the left. I'm given to understand that sarcasm is a tool that's appreciated by the intelligent. So the left, the alt-left, they don't get it. But this is an article from Ethan Hunt back in August of 2019. It says NASA admits that climate change occurs because of changes in Earth's solar orbit and not because of SUVs and fossil fuels. Well, it really can be a combination of things, but having found out from the former NASA director that the moon's orbit is slightly changing and the Earth's orbit is slightly changing, and as the term was, it's becoming more squashed. Well, that would mean there are times when we're closer to the sun and we're further away from the sun. And I know there's some leftists at NASA that said, oh no, changing Earth's orbit doesn't affect our climate at all. And I would humbly submit that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you get closer to the sun, or if you get further away from the sun, it is absolutely going to affect your climate. It just as more solar activity, more solar flares, they're going to affect our climate, and there's not a lot that we can do about more solar flares, solar activity, solar hotspots. And I'd sarcastically ask a question regarding the Bureau of Land Management and National Forest Service, since they were going to be spending so much time on climate change, and we had heard the Earth's orbit was changing slightly and the moon's orbit was changing slightly. Could they do anything about that? So for those that thought I was really challenging BLM and the Bureau of Land Management and the National Forest Service, like they were going to do something about the Earth's orbit, the National Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, they are not going to do anything about the Earth's orbit because they can't. It's not their job. And although there's some professor that thinks we could adjust our orbit, I think that's still yet to be arrived at scientifically. But it's an interesting concept, but I had no belief that it was about to happen by the Bureau of Land Management and National Forest Service. But it is interesting to look back. I missed this article back in 2019. It goes into much more detail about not only the changing orbit, but the changing tilt from time to time. But then if you do more digging, you find out that actually, going back millions, some say 56 million, some say billions, that the planet was much hotter, and the planet's orbit was closer to the sun. That it's moved back some over, according to some, the millions or billions, whatever you believe, number of years. So I also want to mention this article from the Washington Times, June 16, 2021, Stephen Dinan, about the smartphone smugglers, how social media is reshaping border crime. Really intriguing. The author does an amazing job of pulling these things together, but it's interesting. The drug cartels south of our border that apparently we're informed have workers in every city in America. And of course, we've heard before that the Border Patrol, ICE, the U.S. government is considered to be the logistics for the multi-billion-dollar drug cartels in Mexico, because the drug cartels get them across illegally into the United States. And I've seen people in the middle of the night as they're being processed by Border Patrol, long lines of people. I've watched them. Comparing addresses, sometimes switch addresses. They're the addresses that the drug cartels have given them as to where the drug cartels want them to go work in order to earn enough money, either drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, to pay off the rest of their debt to the drug cartels for getting them into the United States illegally. And many times it's the U.S. government, which means U.S. taxpayers, that end up paying to send the drug cartel's employees or indentured servants to the cities where the drug cartels want them. It's incredible that we, as a U.S. government, are helping the drug cartels in Mexico make the tens of billions of dollars that they use to keep different levels of government corrupt in Mexico, that keep the Mexican people from having the economy that would allow them to have across the board wonderful homes, have wonderful jobs, and be one of the top economies in the world. It's the corruption. The drug cartels keep Mexico from having their true place in the top economies in the world. They've got some of the hardest working people in the world. They've got incredible natural resources, a fantastic location, actually better than the U.S. because they're between North and South America. They're between the Pacific and the Atlantic. Incredible location, hardworking people, great natural resources, good ports. But the corruption that the American people are funding through their U.S. government and through the purchase of drugs that are massively coming into this country. If somebody truly has compassion for the people of Mexico and Central America, they would demand that our southern border be secured, that we continue to provide visas in greater numbers than any country in the world, but we secure the border so that we cut the tens of billions of dollars from flowing to the drug cartels that then corrupt and destroy lives, kill Americans with fentanyl and other drugs that they're pouring into our country. And the Mexican people would come to the United States on vacation to spend the significant, wonderful money they had earned without fear of the drug cartels and what they will do to them if they're not subservient. There was a time in Mexico where people who were wealthy knew the drug cartels would normally leave them alone. There was a time in Mexico where the drug cartels basically had wink and nod agreement, look, we won't have a tax in tourist attractions because we know how important that money is. Well, all of those days are gone. And if we were really a compassionate neighbor, we would secure our border. We would stop drawing off people with the potential to be the best citizens that Guatemala, Mexico, other countries have, drawing them up here because of the corruption below our border that we in the U.S. government are helping fund. It really needs to stop, but it's getting worse, much, much worse, as we're seeing numbers that no one has seen in many, many, many years. Now, there's been so much appropriate concern about January 6th and what happened that day. Unfortunately, we don't know all that happened that day. There are some major, major questions that need to be answered. We know that the former chief of the Capitol Police testified that they got no intelligence from the FBI about potential violence on January 6th. And, you know, there were lots of stories about people that were here at the Capitol on January 6th that may have carried a Confederate flag, may have had red and MAGA or Trump, but there were Capitol Police that told me the day before, hey, we've heard there's going to be people that hate Trump that are going to be trying to blend in, and there is going to be violence, and we're concerned about it. But the chief of Capitol Police said they got no intel like that from the FBI. An article a few days ago from Revolver says unindicted co-conspirators in the January 6 cases raised disturbing questions of federal foreknowledge. It's June 14th. And I saw a friend, Tucker Carlson, covered this last night. But this is really disturbing. And this is something that I know from my time here in Congress has disturbed Democrats and Republicans alike across the aisle, because we don't like to see government agents stirring up trouble or find that there are criminal acts that would not likely have occurred had not the federal government been participating, whether they were actual agents or undercover agents or informants that were working for the federal government. But this is scary stuff. This is kind of third world stuff. This is not only third world stuff, but this is like Putin kind of activity. You know, so if there were federal agents that were involved on January 6th, we really need to know what the FBI knew and when they knew it. And not only that, we need to know how much participation did any of our federal friends, either at DOJ, FBI, or any of the intel community, what kind of role were they playing? Because there's information that came out about the effort to kidnap the Michigan governor, and there were federal agents. So it's been said there were federal agents that were involved in that. And it would seem if you have 14 people that are involved in a conspiracy to commit a crime, and over a third of them, including people in leadership, are federal agents or undercover agents or people that are working for a federal entity, that we've got some serious problems and we have not done adequate oversight. And it disturbs me greatly that there was not more information forthcoming from our federal law enforcement, intelligence, DOJ, than was received here on Capitol Hill, because surely if they had known the level of planning by a small group to actually commit violence and break into our U.S. Capitol, they would have been better prepared. And I know some of us have had extreme differences with the Speaker, but I just feel sure if she had known the level of violence that was being talked about and planned and monitored by DOJ, FBI, surely she would not have allowed the Sergeant at Arms to turn down National Guard support on January the 6th. Now, this article, it pulls from documents, legal documents that have been filed by the federal government in some of these different cases. This article says it wishes to address the matter directly in the following three questions. In the year leading up to January 6 and during January 6 itself, to what extent were the three primary militia groups, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and the 3 Percenters, that the FBI, DOJ, Pentagon, and Network News have labeled most responsible for planning and executing a Capitol attack on January 6th, infiltrated by agencies of the federal government or informants of said agencies? Question 2, exactly how many federal undercover agents or confidential informants were present at the Capitol or in the Capitol during the infamous siege, and what roles did they play? Merely passive informants or active instigators? And third, finally, of all of the unindicted co-conspirators referenced in the charging documents, the official federal pleadings, of those indicted for crimes on January 6, how many worked as a confidential informant or as an undercover operative for the federal government, FBI, Army intelligence, etc.? In the narrative about January 6, or if the narrative about January 6 does not conform to the questions above, the American people will never learn the most important truth about what January 6 is and what kind of country they're really living in. It turns out the federal government did, in fact, have undercover agents or confidential informants embedded within the so-called militia groups indicted for conspiring to obstruct the Senate certification on January 6. The implications would be nothing short of seismic, especially if such agents or informants enjoyed extremely senior level positions within such groups. And the thing is, like I say, they've got documentation, the federal pleadings that the United States government has filed in some of these cases that really raise serious issues. Yeah, there's no question there were radical groups there. And those three seem to be the most prominent. But from the pleadings from the Department of Justice itself, it appears that they had significant presence and participation in what went on. And they're really, we do need to see the 14,000 hours of security videos, seeing Ashley Babbitt killed by an officer standing off to the side. there were officers in front of the window, but then there were officers on the other side where Ashley was, and it appeared it was John Sullivan, a Trump hater, that told them if they will move out of the way, they won't get hurt. And the officers they moved out of the way, and these guys broke through the glass. And yet, with all of the people that the FBI has sought information on and put up pictures, and it appears they were probably wearing masks, but there's other 14,000 hours of video. These guys were around the Capitol. They didn't have their masks up at all times, but it doesn't appear that the FBI has asked for assistance in identifying those people that broke through the glass, or that were right there at least, when Ashley was shot in the neck and killed. And that normally means, if they're not asking for help in identifying somebody, that they know who they are, and maybe they're person 1, person 2, person 3, person 15 that are referred to in the pleadings of people that were working with the FBI or federal authorities of some kind. But this is very unsettling stuff. It was bad enough to have our Capitol attacked. And as a former felony judge, I would have no problem sending people to prison that broke into this Capitol, that literally broke in, or that did damage, or that stole things here. There's no place for that. And they do need to be severely punished. But were some of those people doing those things working for the FBI? Were they egged on by federal authorities? Because it sure looks like, from some of these legal documents they've filed and the masking of names and referring to them as something other than their real names, that we have a serious problem with some of the people that were involved that day, that appears were either working for federal authorities or were informants for federal authorities and had leadership positions in those groups, and quite possibly, some cases probably, helped egg them on. This article says, in many cases, the unindicted co-conspirators appear to be much more aggressive and egregious participants in the very so-called conspiracy, serving as the basis for charging those indicted. The question immediately rises as to why this is the case, and forces us to consider whether certain individuals are being protected from indictment because they were involved in January 6 as undercover operatives or confidential informants for a federal agency. So another place further on in the article, it points out this would be far worse than the already bad situation of the government knowing about the possibility of violence and doing nothing. Instead, this would imply that elements of the federal government were active instigators in the most egregious and spectacular aspects of January 6, amounting to a monumental entrapment scheme used as a pretext to imprison otherwise harmless protesters at the Capitol, and in much larger sense used to frame the entire MAGA movement as potential domestic terrorists. And some of the, there's so much more. Let's see, further on, I guess it's page 626. In one of the plot's climactic scenes, in the main van driving up to look at Governor Whitmer's vacation home, and that's, of course, the plot to kidnap the governor, 3 out of the 5 people in the van, 60% of the plot's senior leaders, were federal agents and informants. FBI infiltrators comprised, at the very least, talking about overall in that plot, 26% of the plotters. That's at least 5 FBI operatives have been disclosed against just 14 suspects indicted. So looking at some of and these are the pleadings by the DOJ themselves, but just to give an idea of what we're dealing with, says on December 30th, 2020, Watkins and Caldwell exchanged the following text messages. Watkins, looks like a green light to come to D.C. on the 6th. The rally point still at your place. Caldwell, not that I'm aware of. I've been contacted by no one. Typical person 1. Here's the rub, person 2. And I will be in a hotel within striking distance of the city starting on the 4th, so we won't even be here. There will be some stuff going on during the 5th, and we want to be part of whatever it shakes out. Well, person 1 and person 2 are apparently working for the federal authorities, some federal agency. Another place, it references person 2, person 3, person 1, and they seem to be significant leaders in what's going on. Another place, person 3, email person 3 several maps along with a message. These maps will get you from the hotel into D.C. I mean, person 10 checked into the Hilton Garden Inn in Vienna. Person 3, another reference. Person 15 and person 20 are referenced. These are people that they're covering up their names because they're working for the federal authorities. And if you look at some of the video on January 6th, there were a lot of people walking around. They had no business being in the Capitol, but it's quite concerning that people that were extremely active at all should have been or were working for federal entities such that they have to cover up their names because of their complicity with the federal authorities during that day. So that's United States versus Caldwell Crowell. And then there's one, government's opposition to defendant's motion for reconsideration of detention. They're holding some of these people still. Some with 23 hours, 24 hours a day in solitary. Some were just walking around. They did no damage. They should not have come into the Capitol, but it remains to be seen why the government has their stinger out so much for people, no matter how mild their participation on January 6th, and yet the biggest damage done to the United States in protests was last summer, and those folks aren't being treated the same way that others are. So there's some very serious questions that need to be answered. We do need the answers. We need to know how many federal agents, how many informants had given information to federal agencies, and why in the world all of that information was not provided to people that needed to protect Capitol Hill. So we need an investigation. We don't need one that has an entire Democrat staff. It needs to be truly bipartisan to get to the bottom of just what happened that day and who caused it to happen. And with that, I yield back.